The guy came in 4 Saturdays in a row before I flagged him as something worth thinking about, and by then, it was already too late to do anything clean about it. I sell used cars off a lot on Central, east of the fairgrounds in Albuquerque. Nothing fancy, trade-ins, a lot of first-time buyers, a lot of guys paying cash out of a work truck. Summers are brutal. In June, the asphalt goes soft around 3 in the afternoon, and you can smell the tar mixing with the armor, all the detail kid uses on the tires. That's the whole scene. Heat, dust, a line of banner flags that never stopped snapping, and the Sandias sitting east of us like they were painted on. First Saturday, he walked the front row. Beige linen shirt, khakis, a small black crossbody bag, 50s maybe, clean-shaven, sunglasses hanging off his collar. He looked at the Camrys, an older F-150 with the tow package, a green Forester I'd been trying to move for a month. I did my walk-up, said hey, told him my name was on the placard by the door if he needed anything. He smiled, said thanks, said he was just looking. Fine. Half our Saturdays are people just looking. Second Saturday, he was back. Same shirt or a shirt like it. Same bag. He nodded at me like we were old church friends. I asked if he wanted to sit inside one of the trucks. He said no, he was still doing his research. He said the word research like it was polite code for none of your business. Some people are like that. You back off and let them cook. Third Saturday, Ray noticed him. Ray's been on that lot longer than I have. He came inside and said, "Your buyer's back." I said, "What buyer?" He tipped his chin at the window. The guy was standing between two sedans holding his phone up like he was checking the mileage in a listing. That's the trick you learn. Guys who really want the car open the door and sit in it. Guys who just look at the odometer sticker on the windshield are killing time. Fourth Saturday, I offered him a bottle of water. He took it, he didn't drink it. He held it against the back of his neck for a second and then handed it back. He said, "It's warmer than last week." He said it like we were finishing a conversation from 6 days ago. His voice was flat, not cold, not friendly. It was the voice of a guy giving directions to a stranger. I asked, straight up, what he was looking for. He said something about needing to move his mother into town and wanting something reliable for her. I nodded. I told him we had a low-mile Corolla coming in on trade the following week. He said, "Great." He didn't ask when. He didn't ask the price. He looked past my shoulder for a second, then back at me, and he smiled the exact same smile as the first Saturday. Then he left. That should have been the day I started paying attention. We were slammed, monsoon clouds building over the West Mesa, a family arguing over a minivan on the back row, and I forgot about him by 6. Fifth Saturday is where it turned. I was standing under the awning by the office, drinking a Gatorade, watching him do his loop. He'd been on the lot maybe 20 minutes. He stopped at the Forester again. He raised his phone. I remember thinking, that's a bad angle for a car. He wasn't shooting the front, or the wheel, or the interior. He was holding the phone above the hood, tilted up and over, pointed at the couple who'd walked in 5 minutes before him. The husband was leaning in the passenger window of a Tacoma. The wife was on her phone. He took the shot and lowered his hand and moved 2 cars down. I told myself he was checking a text. That worked for about 30 seconds. Then he did it again. This time at a kid, maybe 19, who'd come in with his mom. Same movement. Phone up, held slightly high, framed on the kid, then down, then walk. I set the Gatorade on the trash can lid, started to head over. Marisol called me from inside because a customer was on hold. By the time I got back out, he was already at his car, a gray Nissan Altima parked on the street, not in our lot. He pulled away before I made it to the sidewalk. I went back inside and sat down and tried to work out if I'd actually seen what I thought I'd seen. Maybe he was on a video call. Maybe he was texting his wife a picture of the Forester and the couple was just in frame. Maybe. But the movement, twice, that little tilt up over the hood, that wasn't accidental. I didn't sleep great that week. 6th Saturday, I got there early, opened the gate myself, parked in the employee row behind the office where we all keep our personal cars. Mine's an '08 4Runner, silver, dinged up on the driver's side from an old incident. I locked it, checked it, walked around to the front. He didn't show up in the morning. By 1, I'd half convinced myself I'd overreacted the week before. By 3, the sky was doing its usual monsoon show, purple over the Sandias, and I hadn't seen him. By 4, Ray waved me over and said, "Hey, isn't that your guy?" He was on the far end of the front row, wearing a different shirt this time. Gray, same bag. He wasn't taking pictures that I could see. He was just walking, slow. He nodded at me across the lot. I nodded back. My hands were cold in 100 degrees of heat. I stayed on him, made a point of it. I helped a woman look at an Elantra with my body angled so I could see him in my peripheral. He didn't do anything strange. He walked. He looked at cars. He left at 5:20, got into the same gray Altima on the street, pulled away. I finished my paperwork at 6:30, locked up with Marisol, walked around the back to my 4Runner, unlocked it, got in, There was a piece of paper on the driver's seat, not a flyer, not a receipt, a photograph printed on regular office paper, cut down to about the size of a postcard. Me, standing under the awning by the office, Gatorade in my hand, looking off to my right. My work shirt, my name on the placard, everything sharp enough to read. Angle was slightly high, angle was over the hood of a car. I remember I laughed. Not because it was funny, it was just the noise my body made. I got out of the truck and I walked around it twice. Doors were locked when I got there, windows all up, no damage to the paint, no tool marks on the frame, nothing. Whoever put it there had opened the truck without breaking it and closed it again and left the picture face up on the seat like a post-it note. I called APD that night. A patrol officer came out on Sunday and took the photo into an evidence bag and wrote down what I told him. He was decent about it. He said it wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't much. No threat written on it, no note. He asked if I'd ever had a stalker, an ex, a customer I'd screwed on a deal. I said no to all three, and the last one wasn't even a lie because I do straight paper. 2 weeks later, a detective called and said they'd shown the description around. Nothing. No match on our lot cameras either, because our lot cameras are for insurance. They point at cars, not at faces on the sidewalk. The Altima never came onto our lot, so we didn't have a plate. He told me to call him if the guy came back and to try to get anything I could. That was the whole plan. That same week, I bought a 2-channel dash cam off Amazon, one with an interior lens, and I wired it into the 4Runner in the back parking spot. I hid the second camera up in the headliner near the dome light. I set it to record on motion anytime the truck was locked. I didn't tell anyone at work. For the next 2 weekends, I moved my truck twice a day, different spots on different streets. Once I had a buddy pick me up out front and drop me 2 blocks past my apartment so anyone watching would see me walk into the wrong building. I know how that sounds. I don't care how it sounds. He didn't come the next Saturday. Didn't come the one after. Third Saturday, out from the photo, he walked in at 2. Same beige shirt as the first time. He didn't look at me when he came onto the lot. He walked the front row like nothing had ever happened. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't sign a title for a woman buying a Sentra, and I had to ask Ray to countersign for me and pretend the pen was out of ink. I stayed inside. Watched him through the window. He did his loop. 20 minutes. He didn't raise his phone once that I saw. He stopped at the Forester, which was still there, and stood next to it for maybe 30 seconds. Then he walked out to the sidewalk and turned left toward where he always parked. I went out the back door. Ran, honestly. Around the fence, through the neighbor's dirt lot, out to Central. I had my phone up before I got to the sidewalk. I got him. Got the shirt, the bag, the walk, the way he opened the door of the Altima without looking around first. I got the plate. New Mexico. 6 characters. Steady. In focus. No shake, because I leaned on a light pole. He drove off. He didn't see me. Or if he did, he didn't act like it. I gave the video to the detective on Monday. He called me back Thursday. The Altima was a rental out of the Sunport. It had been rented on a Wisconsin driver's license, and the person on that license was a 62-year-old woman in Green Bay who had never been to New Mexico, hadn't lost her wallet, and had no idea what he was talking about. The card used to pay for the rental was a prepaid Visa, bought with cash at a gas station on 4th Street. No cameras on the pump side that week. He hasn't been back to the lot. It's been about 4 months. I still park in the employee row. I still check the seat before I get in. That's what I've got. Our apartment in Detroit was on the 5th floor of a brick building off Chain Street, one of those 50s blocks that had been repainted so many times the windowsills didn't shut right. My dad and I had lived there since I was 10. He worked overnight shifts at a warehouse out by the river, so most weeknights it was just me, a bowl of cereal, and whatever was on the laptop. October 2021. I was 15. School had just gone back to full in-person, and I hated it, so I spent a lot of time at home with the door bolted, listening to the pipes tick and the elevator hum on the other side of the wall. The lady across from us was Miss Doreen. That's how she introduced herself the day we moved in, standing in her doorway with a hand on the frame like she needed the wood to hold her up. She was maybe 70-something, small, wore those thick knit cardigans even in July. She kept a wreath of dried corn husks on her door for as long as I could remember, and every fall she'd add a new ribbon to it, orange or brown, always tied in a little bow at the bottom. She wasn't nosy. She wasn't the type to knock. But if you passed her in the hall, she'd stop and ask about your day like she actually wanted to hear the answer. And she remembered stuff. She remembered my dad had bad knees. She remembered I'd taken SAT prep books out of the library. Small things. I only started noticing the guy because of homework. I had this useless online algebra class that met at 7:30 every Tuesday, and I'd sit at the kitchen table with the door to the hallway propped open a crack for air, because our vent was busted. And every Tuesday, sometime between 8 and 8:20, I'd hear the elevator ding, footsteps down the carpet, and then the same 3 knocks on Miss Doreen's door. Not loud, kind of polite actually. Then her chain would slide off and the door would open and close. The first couple times I didn't think anything of it. Old lady, probably a family member. My dad's aunt did the same thing to us for years, would show up out of nowhere with Tupperware. But it kept happening. Tuesdays, then also Fridays. Sometimes a random Sunday. Always after dark. Always the same 3 knocks. And he never stayed long. That was the thing. Maybe 15 minutes. 20 at most. Then the door would open again, footsteps down the hall, elevator, gone. I got curious enough to look through our peephole once when I heard him coming down the corridor. Big guy, not fat, just tall and thick through the shoulders. Bomber jacket, dark jeans, a tiger's cap pulled low, maybe 40. He had this weird way of walking, like he was trying to be quiet but couldn't manage it because his boots were too heavy. He knocked. She opened. He went in. I stopped watching after a minute because it felt gross to spy. I mentioned it to my dad once, offhand, while he was making coffee before his shift. She got a boyfriend? He said, half joking. He's like 30 years younger than her. Nephew then. Grandson maybe. He never comes during the day. Dad shrugged. People work weird hours. I work weird hours. He grabbed his thermos and left, so I dropped it. The night that changed things was a Wednesday. Not even his usual day. I'd been up late because I couldn't sleep, and I was in the kitchen filling a glass of water around 11:30 when I heard those 3 knocks. I froze with the tap still running. I don't know why I went to the door. I really don't. I just did. Turned off the faucet, walked barefoot on the linoleum, put my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens made everything bulge. Our hallway was that yellow motel lighting kind of yellow. The bulbs the landlord never changed. Miss Doreen's door was directly opposite ours, maybe 8 feet away. I caught him on the way out. He was already stepping back into the hall, pulling the door partly closed behind him, and he had something in his hand, an envelope, white, business-sized, folded once. He tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket without looking at it, like it was routine, like he did it in his sleep. Then he turned toward the elevator, and I saw Miss Doreen. She was standing in the doorway holding the edge of the door with both hands, and her face, God, her face was wrong. She wasn't angry, that's what I remember most clearly. If she'd been angry, I probably would have written it off as some family fight, money stuff, whatever. But she wasn't. She looked scared, small and scared in a way a 70-year-old woman shouldn't look at her own front door. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were on his back the whole time he walked away, and she didn't blink. She just watched him go like she was waiting to be sure he was actually leaving. Then she closed the door, quiet, slow, like she didn't want him to hear it click. I stood there with my forehead against our door for I don't know how long. My glass of water was still on the counter. I could hear the ice maker in the fridge dumping cubes. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I told my dad. I tried to keep it casual because I already felt stupid about watching. But he stopped what he was doing when I got to the part about her face. He was standing at the sink, and he set his spoon down and looked at me for a long second. "You sure?" he said. Not a question, more like he wanted me to be sure. "Yeah." He nodded a couple times, kind of to himself. He didn't say anything else about it that morning. He went to sleep because he'd just gotten off shift, and I went to school, and I honestly thought he'd forget or write it off. He didn't. 2 days later, he baked a coffee cake. My dad, who does not bake. He got a boxed mix from the corner store on Mac, followed the directions like it was a bomb defusal, and walked it across the hall on a Saturday afternoon with a paper towel over the top. I watched through the peephole because at that point I had a habit. Miss Doreen opened her door, and her face went through about 4 expressions in a row before it settled on polite surprise. My dad said something about being neighbors for 5 years and never saying hi properly, and held out the cake, and she laughed a little and stepped back and let him in. He was over there for almost an hour. When he came back, he looked tired in a different way than his usual tired. He sat down at the kitchen table and pushed the empty paper plate around with one finger. "Her nephew," he said finally. "Okay. Sister's kid, grown man, been coming by since around Christmas last year." I waited. Dad wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the plate. "She has 3 kids of her own," he said. "They live out of state, 2 in Ohio, 1 in Georgia. She hasn't told them any of this because the nephew said if she did, he'd tell them something from a long time ago. She wouldn't say what." I didn't push. Push what? "He's been taking money. Every visit. She gives him cash from her Social Security and he leaves. That's the arrangement. She said the first time was a loan. He said he'd pay it back. Then the next month it wasn't a loan anymore." I didn't know what to say. I remember the fridge kicked on, and it was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. "How much?" I asked, because it was the only question I could get out. "Enough that she'd been eating cereal for dinner for 6 months. He said it flat, without any weight on it, which somehow made it worse. He got her to talk to somebody. I don't know exactly how. There's a guy he knows from the warehouse whose wife works at a legal aid office off Woodward, and between the three of them, they got her to the precinct on a Monday morning to file a report. My dad drove her. He sat in the waiting room for 2 hours with a magazine he wasn't reading. The nephew got picked up about a week later. I don't know all the details, and honestly, I didn't want to. There were charges. Something about extortion, something else about elder financial abuse. He didn't come back to the building. I checked the peephole for a while, especially on Tuesdays around 8, but the hallway stayed empty except for the guy from 507 who walked his beagle at weird hours. About 2 weeks after the arrest, Miss Doreen knocked on our door. 3 knocks. Same rhythm as him, which I know is stupid, but it made my stomach drop for a second before I remembered. She had a pie, sweet potato, from scratch, still warm through the foil. She stood in the doorway with her cardigan buttoned all the way up and her hand on the frame the same way she'd done the first day. And she looked up at my dad and said thank you. And then she looked at me because she'd figured out somehow that I was the one who'd seen. And she said thank you to me too. Then she went back across the hall. We ate the pie that night with the TV on low. My dad didn't say anything about it, and I didn't either. It was the best pie I've ever had, and that's not me being dramatic. It just was. I still think about her face in that doorway sometimes. Not the pie, the face. How she watched him walk away like she needed to see him actually gone. It bothers me that if I hadn't been thirsty at 11:30 on a Wednesday, if I'd just gone to bed, she'd probably still be handing over envelopes. That's the part I can't shake. Not that it happened, but that it almost didn't get seen. The call came on a Tuesday in early March, and by Wednesday afternoon, I was driving into a town in eastern Iowa that had maybe 2,000 people in it, 1 grain elevator, and 4 confirmed cases of a bacterial infection that had no business being there. I work for a state health department. I won't say which one. When something rare shows up in a county where nothing rare ever shows up, they send someone like me out to knock on doors and ask the same questions in 15 different ways until a pattern falls out. Usually it's a church potluck. Sometimes it's a farmer's well. Once it was a guy who kept pet turtles in his kitchen sink. This one wasn't going to be turtles. The infection was Burkholderia pseudomallei. If you don't know what that is, don't worry. Most doctors in the Midwest don't either. It's a soil bacterium from Southeast Asia and Northern Australia. It causes something called melioidosis. In the US, we see maybe a dozen cases a year, and almost all of them are travelers coming back from Thailand or Vietnam. 4 cases in 1 Iowa county, none of them with a passport stamped in the last decade, was not a thing that was supposed to happen. I checked into a motel off the state highway. The heater rattled. The parking lot smelled like diesel and wet gravel. There was still ice on the windshield in the morning. The first patient I interviewed was a woman in her 60s named Marlene. She was home from the hospital, still on IV antibiotics through a PICC line in her arm. She lived in a ranch house with vinyl siding and a bird feeder in the yard that a squirrel was actively destroying. She made me instant coffee and answered every question like she was talking to her insurance company. I asked about her water. Well water, tested last year. Fine. I asked about her garden. She hadn't started yet. Ground was still frozen. I asked about travel. She hadn't been out of the county since Christmas, and that was Cedar Rapids. I asked what she ate in the 2 weeks before she got sick. She walked me through it. Church on Sunday, casseroles from her daughter, groceries. Where do you shop? I asked. Corner place off 2nd Street, she said. Ronnie's. I wrote it down and moved on. The second patient was a mechanic in his 40s. He was the sickest of the 4, almost went septic before the ER ran the right test. He didn't want to talk to me. I stood in his kitchen and asked about produce and meat and dairy, and he grunted through it. When I got to groceries, he said Ronnie's mostly, and shrugged. The third patient was a widow, Ronnie's. The fourth was a high school teacher who lived alone. He kept a bird. He was very worried about the bird. I told him birds don't carry this. I asked about groceries. Ronnie's. 4 for 4. That's not usually how it works. Usually you get a cluster and 1 or 2 of them shop somewhere else and you have to chase the overlap. 4 for 4 is a gift, and gifts in this job make me nervous. I drove over to Ronnie's that afternoon. It was a small store, the kind of place with 2 aisles and a cooler in the back and a bell over the door. The floor was scuffed linoleum. There was a rack of birthday cards nobody had touched in months. The man behind the counter was maybe 60, thin, gray hair cut short, wire-rimmed glasses. He was reading a paperback when I came in. He set it down and smiled. I introduced myself, not by name, by job. State Health Department, following up on a few cases. Nothing to worry about, just some questions. He nodded and said, melioidosis. I stopped writing. Most people don't know that word. Most doctors don't. I hadn't said the word. I hadn't even said bacterial. I'd said a few cases. Yeah, I said, careful. How'd you hear? Small town, he said. Marlene's daughter comes in. She was telling me about the tests. He shrugged. I looked it up. Rare stuff. That was a reasonable answer. I let it go. I asked about his suppliers. He walked me through them. Produce from a distributor in Davenport. Meat from a place in Iowa City. Dry goods from the regional cash and carry. Nothing exotic. I asked if I could look around. Sure, he said. Take whatever you want. I'll bag it for the lab if you want. That was the second thing. Normal store owners get defensive. Normal store owners ask if they need a lawyer, or they get quiet, or they start blaming their suppliers. This guy was helpful. He was calm. He handed me sample bags like he'd done it before. I took produce. I took packaged meat. I took bottled water and tap water from the sink in the back. I swabbed the handles of the cooler and the counter where he sliced deli. I took a soil sample from the little herb pots he had by the register, and he watched me do it and didn't say a word. He said, "You'll want the humidifier too." I looked up. There was a small humidifier running on a shelf behind him, the kind you'd have in a nursery, steam curling out of it. "For the plants," he said, and nodded at the herb pots. "Dry in here in winter." I took a swab from the humidifier's reservoir. He watched me do that too. He seemed almost pleased. When I was packing up, he said, "The mechanic, is he going to be okay?" I said I couldn't discuss patients. He nodded like that was the right answer. I drove back to the motel with the samples in a cooler in the passenger seat, and I didn't turn the radio on. I sat in the parking lot for a while before I went inside. Something was wrong with him. I couldn't put my finger on it yet. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't performing. He was interested. Like a man watching a puzzle be worked out by someone else and wanting to see if you'd get to the answer. The lab called me back the next afternoon. The produce was clean. The meat was clean. The tap water was clean. The bottled water was clean. The counter swabs were clean. The soil in the herb pots was clean. The humidifier reservoir was positive. Heavy growth, same strain as the 4 patients. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and read the email twice. You don't get B. pseudomallei in a humidifier in Iowa. You don't get it in a humidifier anywhere in this country by accident. The bacterium likes warm, wet soil in the tropics. It does not migrate into a small-town grocery through the ventilation. Someone put it there. I called my supervisor. She listened for a long time and then she said, "Don't go back to the store. Sit tight. I'm making calls." I asked what she was going to do. She said, "I'm going to find out who he is." I stayed in the motel that night. I ate a sandwich from a gas station. I watched the ceiling fan turn in circles. I tried to remember exactly how he'd said the word melioidosis. He hadn't stumbled on it. He'd said it the way a doctor says it, quick and clean, the stress in the right place. She called me back the next morning. Her voice was different. "CDC is coming in," she said. "Federal, you're off it. I need you to write up your notes and hand everything over. Don't go back to the store. Don't call anyone in that town." "Just wait." I asked her what she'd found. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "He worked in a lab. A while ago. Out west. He was let go. That's all I have. That's all I'm going to have." "Let go for what?" "That's the part I can't get to," she said. "It's not that they wouldn't tell me. It's that the file is sealed at a level I don't have. I made 2 calls this morning, and after the second one, a man from a 3-letter agency called me back and asked me very politely to stop. I didn't say anything. She said, "Write it up. Go home." 2 people from CDC arrived that afternoon. They didn't wear jackets with logos. They wore normal clothes. They took my samples, my notes, my swabs, the addresses of the 4 patients, and a signed statement. They were friendly. They were also very fast. I asked one of them, a woman with a quiet voice, what was going to happen to the store owner. She said, "He's already been picked up." I asked when. She said, "This morning, before you woke up." I asked if he'd said anything. She looked at me for a second and then she said, "He asked if the mechanic was going to be okay." I drove out of town that night. The sky was low and gray, and there was a fine sleet coming down that turned to slush on the windshield. I passed Ronnie's on the way to the highway. The lights were off. The bell on the door was still. There was no tape, no cruiser, no sign that anything had happened there at all. Someone had already been through it and put it back the way it was. The press got a statement 3 days later. Product contamination at a local grocery. Source identified and removed. 4 residents recovering. No ongoing risk to the public. The store was going to be sold to new ownership under a different name. I signed the non-disclosure 2 weeks after that. It was thick. It named specific agencies. It named specific words I was not allowed to use in connection with what had happened. Melioidosis was one of them. The town wasn't named in the document, but the county was, and the dates were, and my name was on every page. I don't know what he did in that lab. I don't know why he picked a grocery in a town of 2,000 people in Iowa. I don't know if the 4 were chosen or if it was just whoever walked in. I know he watched me swab the humidifier and he looked pleased. I know he asked about the mechanic twice. I still work in the same job. I've been to a lot of small towns since then. Whenever I walk into a corner store and the man behind the counter sets down his book and smiles at me, I think about it for a second, and then I ask my questions, and I go home. Thanks for sticking around till the end. Tell me in the comments which story you thought was the best, the weirdest, or just the most unsettling. Also, make sure you check out the other videos on the channel. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.